Hi everyone, I want to welcome you to this week's episode of the Lesson in 5. Lesson in 5 is a weekly program where we summarize the Sabbath School Lesson into 5 main points. If you're new around here, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future videos. The Sabbath School Lesson for this week is the hard way. We learn about King Ahaz and how he chose to turn his back on God and looked for human kings for help. And we want to see what lessons we can learn from an ancient king. Fulfilled prophecy. When Ahaz chose to go to the king of Assyria for help, he was given a prophecy that there would be a young maiden who would be with child. Yes, this prophecy was pointing future to Jesus, but also it was speaking about a child who would be born in the house of Isaiah, the child Maher-shalal-hash-baz. When this child was born, and this child is before this child is able to choose what to eat, to choose between honey and curds, between milk and honey, kind of ringing a bell, this prophecy would be fulfilled, that Israel would no longer be a force to reckon with. Syria would also be severely weakened. And this happened exactly within 2 years of this prophecy being given. We find Israel being significantly weakened. We also see Syria being significantly weakened. These two nations no longer posed a threat to Judah, the people of God. Foreseen consequences. God had already foretold what was going to happen. Unfortunately, Ahaz chose to trust the arm of flesh rather than trusting in God. Ahaz chose to go to the king of Assyria for help, and this came back to bite him and the entire nation of Judah. We ought to learn to trust in God and lean on his promises, even when what is seen seems contrary to what is unseen, which is the word of God. What's in a name? The name Maher-shalal-hash-baz, a tongue twister indeed, means to speed up the spoil and hasten the plunder. The name was speaking to the people of Judah. The name was preaching even to their neighbors in Israel that God is going to fulfill his word. His word will come true. If you do not come back to God, God is going to destroy the nation of Israel. God is going to weaken even the nation of Judah. Exile is going to come on the nation of Judah. And so in the name, God was speaking to his people. God was calling his people back to himself. We have nothing to fear when we fear God himself. It was Franklin Roosevelt who said we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Well, when we fear God, we've got nothing else to fear. When we learn to trust God, our fears should slowly disappear and be replaced with faith. We need to learn to trust God in difficult circumstances. When the world seems to be going against us, we need to learn to depend on the word of God. There are so many things that people fear in the world around us. Many people fear the dead and the powers of the afterlife. Many people are afraid when they think about what could be happening beyond the grave, and maybe even have fears about spiritualism and the occult. But we need to learn to trust in the power of God, even in a dark and scary world. Gloom of the ungrateful living dead. When King Ahaz chose to turn his back on God, it wasn't surprising, because throughout his life he had turned to pagan gods. These pagan gods represented a very spiritualistic form of worship. These are people who believed in dead spirits and had a lot of fantasy that they had in their faith. And Ahaz chooses to turn his back on the God of heaven, and he trusts in the occult. Many of us may do exactly the same thing when we choose not to trust in God and God-ordained solutions, when we doubt the power of prayer and we look for the power of many of these false prophets and other professed healers. We are really turning our back on God, and we are choosing to put our confidence in not only human solutions, but we are choosing to put our confidence in devilish solutions. God calls us to trust Him even in difficult circumstances. We ought not make the same mistake that Ahaz made. We need to learn to trust in God even in difficult circumstances. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the Lesson in 5. If you've enjoyed our video, remember to share, like, and subscribe. Until next week, God bless you all.